the show, Discover the Difference, brought to you by C3. I'm your host, Jamie Reed, alongside my witty partner, Gabe Earl. On today's show, we have Vun Lai Dumone of worksmART Advantage. Vun's background is absolutely inspirational. She's a former TEDx presenter, and she works with well-known companies like Google and Amazon. Her background as a Vietnamese refugee, how her family transformed the nail salon industry, her willingness to be vulnerable, and talk about how she helps organizations chase curiosity is going to pique your interest. Enjoy getting to know Vun in this episode. Vun, it was really great to learn a little bit about you and what you do with worksmART Advantage. And Gabe and I are huge proponents of culture and galvanizing leadership teams. I think the thing that stood out to us that was really interesting was the word natural. And just before we started recording here, I heard you use it to natural creativity. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because the concept of it being a natural process and how you go about it sounds mysterious and foreign to Gabe and I. So can you expand on what you do at worksmART Advantage and how that plays a role?
Sure. So you're telling me that Legos and crayons aren't a part of your normal office supplies? No?
They're going to be in the future, I think.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to change that. So yeah, my work is in bringing creativity into the workplace. And the way I do that is by bringing this idea of everyone's creative, right? We're all innately creative as human beings. And what's missing is that we just don't bring in our creativity into the workplace. So when I started my business, it was literally about hands-on creativity, visual arts, and bringing arts and crafts into the workplace just to give people a place or a way to just be creative in the workplace. What I found is people weren't buying that. people really couldn't just buy the idea like human beings just need a place to create. So I started attaching it to areas that I felt brought more value into corporations, like team development, leadership training. So the way I do it now is I incorporate creative activities into leadership concepts. And what I find with it now is not just about bringing creativity and giving people a chance to do hands-on creative work. What I found through my work is that by bringing creativity in the workplace, you're using a tool that everyone in your organization has access to, right? Not everyone has access to accounting skills. Not everyone has access to marketing skills. And I use accounting because you can teach me accounting as many times as you want. I'm never really going to quite get it. But if you insert creativity into any learning modality or any topic, you're tapping into a capacity that every single person in your organization has.
So, can you walk us through an example? I'm also having a hard time connecting to the fact that Gabe and I might be sitting down with you on the floor with Legos and, some magical moment evolves out of it. Walk us through a scenario. What does that look like?
Sure. Okay. You just gave me a great idea because I usually use tables and chairs, but we may end up on the floor now. So let me give you an example of leadership training. So for example, my leadership training course, I do a course called Vulnerability and Trust. And I actually bring in a spoken word artist for that one. So I've expanded my view of how to bring creativity into the workplace. So vulnerability and trust, I might bring in a spoken word artist so people actually have a chance to experience vulnerability and trust, right? The whole idea is experiential learning. For presentation skills, I might use an improv artist to come in and do presentation skills through improvisation. Now with the hands-on stuff, so let's say we're in a meeting and you as the owners of the company, ask a question to 10 people in the room. There are people in that room who are never going to say a word because that's not the way they think. I'm one of those people. If you ask me to, if we're in a conference room and you ask a question and ask for ideas, I'm the last person that's going to speak because that's not the way my mind works. I need time to think. I'm sometimes too concerned about what other people in the room think about my ideas, so I might not speak up at all. But by bringing in a creative modality like Legos, what you do is have every single person in the room build an idea. And then every single person in the room goes around and shares their idea. And there's something about building a model to share your idea that removes it one step away from you, and you're able to talk about it as this model. So everyone shares the idea. And then what we might do is ask everyone build a second idea. And everyone has one idea, whether they're sharing it or not. So now they've had the chance to share that one idea. Now you go around the room and everyone build another model, right? Some people may have a second idea, so they're going to build, they're going to share. And then really where like the creative magic comes in is when you say, now we have 10 more minutes, build as many ideas as you can. No one has 6, 7, or 8 ideas. So that's when the idea of thinking with your hands really comes into play. And now what you're doing is you're getting all the wild and crazy ideas on the table. And we call that divergent thinking, because it doesn't, like, we're not looking at criteria or parameters here. It's just like anything you want to say, any idea you have, it doesn't matter if it's wild and crazy, if it makes no sense, it gets on the table. Because then what happens is we move into convergent thinking. And in convergent thinking, what happens is now you add the criteria, right? Here's our time, here's our deadline, here's our time restrictions, here's our budget. Now, which of these ideas on the table, or which combinations of these ideas on the table are going to make it to the finish line? But what happens with that is that by the time you get to the finish line, everyone in that room feels now that their voice has been heard.
Oh, wow.
Love that.
I love divergent thinking. We actually have that as one of our core values.
Oh, do you really? That's so interesting. I've never heard a company have divergent thinking as a core value.
So yeah, this idea of where you becoming creative. Early in your career, you were a COO of a division of Body Glove, and when you think of a COO, operations and workflows and SOPs and process, you don't really think about creativity. How is that within your personality early on? How did you reconcile that that role with is this something that's innate in you, this creativity, or is this something that you grew over time?
Okay, so the second you said that, let's have an honest conversation here. I was terrible at that job. I was horrible at that job. Like operations, thinking ahead, strategy, planning. That's just not how I naturally operate. So you're like, right, I'm just like I'm a much more of an ideator and an implementer than someone who develops a plan, right? Like I'm someone who comes with an idea and just does it. Like there's no clarification, there's no planning. It's just the idea and then go for it. But what I found in that role and in all the roles since is that knowing that about myself, I need to surround myself by people who have different skills, right? Who have the skills of, if I come up with an idea, I need that person to clarify and be like, okay, so what might go wrong here? What other things should we be thinking about? And then I need to have people on my team who are planners, right? So here's the plan of action, right? Here's the flow of events that need to happen before you implement the idea. So how did I kind of put those two together? I just felt like, number one, I wasn't really good at that job. And number two, just learning that because knowing the way I work, I learned who I need to surround myself by.
So did you reflect back on, is this a reflection back, or did you feel that at the time, like, I gotta move out of this because it's not my right spot?
No, I don't think in the moment I realized that. I mean, I tried to do the work and I struggled through it and I made a lot of mistakes. And I don't think it was until after I left that role that I realized that wasn't quite the right fit for me. And before we start recording, we talked about my background a little bit, right? The fact that I do come from a family who had expectations of me the fact that, to this day, the fact that I'm not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, I think is still very disappointing to my parents. But I feel like a lot of the roles I took before I started my business was not because I felt they were the right roles for me, but I felt like they would impress someone else. So I think that really was, so any role I was in, I felt like I just had to try to do my best. And I just really had to try to fit myself into the mold of whatever that role was, because that's what my parents would have expected. And that's what would impress someone else.
Well, there's so much there that we're going to want to dive into, but let's go back to the origins of it. You have this amazing and inspirational TED Talk, which we'll put the link to at the end of the podcast. walk us through that. You are given a moment's notice for your entire family to vacate Vietnam at the culmination of that war, and you find yourself in Sacramento. Your parents become involved in the founding of the Vietnamese nail industry, and your correlation to some of the expectations that were put on to you by your parents and the way they thought in leaving Vietnam and reestablishing themselves in the United States. Can you just give us a highlight of that TED Talk here so that people have some background knowledge on how you evolved?
Sure. So my TEDx talk is around this framework that I built, that I teach, is called, and it's around this idea of how when we follow our curiosity, ask questions like what if, to look at possibilities, and then take small steps. By doing those three things, what we do is we can create possibilities for ourselves and for others that are seen and unforeseeable. And I had this framework, and that I would teach people and go into organizations and do keynotes about. And it wasn't until my TEDx talk and retelling that story of how, again, we refugees from Vietnam. Our first home here was at Camp Pendleton Marine Base right in San Diego. And then we landed at this refugee integration center up in Sacramento, where my mom, through the help of this Hollywood movie star, they started they trailblazed what's now an $8.3 billion manicure industry in the United States. And in telling that story, I realized, like, wow, that's exactly what my mom, her friends, Tippi Hedren, the movie star, did. They got curious, right? So Tippi was there at this camp as a volunteer to help these women find a career for themselves. And she started with saying, like, well, let's bring in a seamstress and a typist, because those are fairly easy to learn and it's a low barrier of entry into the marketplace. But the women, she had these long red manicured nails, and the women, including my mom, were just curious about those nails. And clearly Tippi could just been like, great, thanks for acknowledging my nails, keep typing, keep sewing. But she paused, right? And she took notice of that curiosity, and they continued to be curious about it. So she continued to take notice of it. And then what she did was she's like, okay, well, maybe there's something here. Let's take one small step. So she went down back to Los Angeles and asked her manicurist, her personal manicurist, would you have any interest in coming up to this camp and teaching these women how to do a basic manicure? And Dusty said yes. So she came up there. And then Tippi took another small step and went to the local beauty school and asked them, would you be willing to take on these 20 women to see that we can get them licensed as manicurists? And that beauty school said yes. And that just, like, those small steps just led to what Tippi really wanted was for these 20 women to be able to, provide for their families and start a career. But what they didn't see was that the refugees and immigrants who came after us would learn from my mom and her friends and their friends from them, and start what would become an $8.3 billion industry.
You talked about how structured they were and wanting you to be, a doctor, a lawyer, et cetera. Was your mom a creative mindset to be willing to go in and have an entrepreneurial spirit and take that on?
I don't think they thought of it that way. I feel, again, in like the insights I got from doing that TEDx talk, is the idea that, they had to follow their curiosity out of necessity, right? They had no choice. What did they have? All they had was their curiosity, right? So any curiosity they had to follow. I don't talk about this in the TEDx talk, but what I realized is that because of my parents' background, where they came from, they were very much about security. And the words they spoke were always about, find security, go to school, get a job, find security. But what I saw them doing on a daily basis was following curiosity, even in small ways, right? We didn't have money growing up. So if there was a light fixture that needed fixing, my mom would get curious, be like, well, what if I took some duct tape and a toothpick and just maneuver something there? So I realized in doing the TEDx talk, like, although they tried to instill in me this idea of following a certain path, what I saw them do on a daily basis and what I clearly learned was this idea of just following curiosities, taking small steps, and who knows what's going to happen next.
So do you think that this idea of following curiosity, do you think that's something that's innate, or is that something that's developed?
I think I would have to say in speaking to other people, it has to be developed. And I realized like in me, it was developed just in like throughout my life, right? It was just developed throughout my life in watching my parents. So I think it was almost embedded in me at a young age. But in teaching this and talking to a lot of people, I would have to say it's something that for most people need to develop, because I don't realize it's so hard for some people to take that small step or try something new. Because for me, I was like, this is what I do all the time.
Does your mom understand that curiosity in her and the lens that you see it through, or is it still just some, innate part of her and she doesn't connect to how you use it?
I think, it's interesting. I think my mom has evolved. Like she came from Vietnam. She was only 27, 3 kids. She was married to a colonel, lieutenant colonel in the South Vietnamese Air Force. She was really meek, right? She was just as young, and he was older than her. And coming to the United States, like I feel like her taking on this career, she didn't know she was starting anything. She was just working, right? Out of necessity to provide for her family. But as we became more stable, she started following curiosity. She's now a master Reiki teacher, or a Reiki master. She's got her massage license. She does all sorts of things. So I think she's come into more understanding this whole idea of like following her curiosities because she wants to, rather out of necessity. So I think we have a better understanding of each other. She still thinks I'm a little bit out there, but that's okay. That's what moms are for, right?
You really have the American dream story. And, fast forward to 2011, you decide to, open up your own Bari studio in Southern California.
That's right. I forgot about that portion of my life.
Start your own business. What was the inflection point, or what was that, to say, hey, I want to do my own thing? Going from, we talked earlier about being a COO to this point.
Yeah. Okay. So and all this I've reflected on over the last few years. So that too. So I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I was doing training, consulting, sales at GlaxoSmithKline, and there was just no creativity there for me. So, and I've always been entrepreneurial. So I said, well, what else can I do? But what I did was I kind of hedged my bets, I guess, if you call it that. It's like I wasn't confident enough to go out there and leave that nice, like I call them the golden handcuffs of the pharmaceutical industry, because it's so easy, right? It's like the benefits are so good. So I didn't really want to leave that, but it's like, what can I do to ignite my creativity, to spark that entrepreneurial spirit in me again? So again, completely on a whim, another girlfriend of mine who I work with, she's like, hey, I've been taking these bar classes. You should come take a class. I took a few classes and I came up with the great idea of like, let's open our own studio. And literally I went home, wrote a business plan, submitted to some banks. Someone gave me money and we started it. And I specifically remember opening night, so much fun. People came, we had a party. The studio we built out was gorgeous. And the next morning I woke up thinking like, oh, now I have to run this thing. Oops. And what I realized in hindsight after 3 years we sold it, is that, once again, that was me kind of hedging my bets. Like I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but I just did it sort of, it was a franchise. So I thought that was the safest way. And I also thought this is something that will impress whoever, my parents, people around me, whatever it was. So in hindsight, again, I was like, this wasn't for me, right? It kind of met some of my needs and some of the things I wanted to do, but it truly wasn't, it wasn't truly where I should have gone.
That seems to be like a common theme where trying to impress. And I think a lot of us struggle with that. We're always trying to impress, our family and our friends. How have you been able to move beyond that? Or have you?
I think I have for the most part. And I think it's something that sticks with you. So you always have to be aware and conscientious of like, is this really for me? Is this really what I want? And always doing, kind of like reflecting and resetting that. I do think so. The way I end up in this business is I still had the studio. I was working at GlaxoSmithKline, and then I had my son. And when I had my son, my brother who was a police officer. He was in a pretty bad motorcycle accident. He was in the neuro ICU for a month and a half. And my son was 11 weeks old at the time. So I had a lot of things going on. We were trying to sell the studio. I still had my full-time job. I had an 11-week-old baby. And my brother was in the hospital in a coma. So I think that time in my life was it was like a dark time, but it was really a time for me to reflect, like, what am I really doing here? Like, what really matters to me? And in those moments, especially sitting in the hospital room for a month, I'm like, this job, like, I can't do this job anymore. And this business we already had decided to sell the business. So rather than kind of dragging it on, we just sold it to the first, we just said yes to the first offer. And then once I don't remember the exact moment, but the thought for me was, I don't want my son growing up seeing his mom just go to work, right? That's not what my parents risked their lives for, right? That's not what my parents brought us to this country for. And that's just not who I am. So I really wanted to create something so that he could see his mom waking up and being joyful and being excited about the work she does. And that's when I decided to leave my full-time job and start this business.
So transitioning back to that worksmART Advantage, do you feel like it's the first time in your life you're really investing in something that's for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And personally and professionally, I feel like, this is like a little off topic, but I feel like there's been so many times in my life I haven't felt present. And that became very clear to me when this gentleman connected with me on LinkedIn. And I hope he doesn't watch this, because then he'll know. But this gentleman connected to me on LinkedIn. He's like, "Hey, I'm just connecting with people from my past." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "Check your Facebook. I sent you a picture." So he sends me a picture, and this picture is my ex-boyfriend at the time. This was probably a good 20 years ago. Myself, this guy, and my sister and my brother-in-law. And I was like, I don't know who this is. So I asked everyone else in the picture. They don't know who he is. And I see that he is from Belgium. I'm like, okay, I studied in Belgium. Maybe that's the connection. So I was like, can you remind me, did we meet when I was in Antwerp, or did we meet when you were over here? And he's like, yeah, we met when you were studying in Antwerp. And then remember, you let me stay in your house for a month. And I have zero memory of this. And that just shows, I mean, for me, I just feel like that's so indicative of I was having a conversation with some girlfriends about this too, really indicative of my life in the past, because I don't feel like I was ever very present in my life, right? Up till recently, honestly, up till recently, where I feel like this is where I should be, this is where I belong, but also without the regrets. Because I did spend some time regretting, like, why didn't I do this earlier? Why didn't I go after what I wanted earlier in my life? But what I realize now is that everywhere I have been is where I needed to be to get to where I am today.
Well, I'm just curious, now that you're finally doing exactly what you want for the first time, is it pure happiness, or is there any moment of guilt or doubt that comes in? Like, how does it feel?
Yes, to all of that. So I love the work I do, and I'm invested in it, and I'm committed to it. And the more I would say there were tons of doubts in the beginning, like, is this doing anything? Like, bringing creativity in the workplace, does it even matter? And by continuing to take small steps and just moving forward and having more experiences and impacting more people and hearing back from people that I've made an impact on, I realized, like, okay, this work does matter. So that's solidified for me that this is where I belong, and I need to keep doing it, because the work does change lives. And not just in the workplace, but I get people who I work with in a team environment, and it's amazing to see how the teams come together, and how people change their leadership styles, and how people are collaborating better together in the workplace. And that's all amazing. That's the work I'm doing. But I'll get emails from people like, oh, I'm now taking time to, when my kid's painting or drawing, I take time to stop and do it with them. You really brought it back. Like, I remember I used to love to paint. I remember as a child I used to be really creative, and I'm doing that again. So that keeps me going. But it's running a business, right? It's running a solopreneurship for the most part. So I'm doing everything. And there are the moments of, what have I gotten myself into? I missed that paycheck. but there's no regret in it. I'm still like, this is what I'm here to do. I'm going to keep going and just trust the process, and just trust that what I'm doing will just continue to grow and develop. And then one other thing on that is, I have an executive coach, and or a business coach, and she said to me the other day, when I was in one of those moments of doubts of like, oh my gosh, why is this so hard? Like, why, like I'm working from 6 a.m. to 12 midnight some days. And she said to me, it's only as hard as you make it. I was like, what do you mean by that? She's like, it's only as hard as you make it. I'm like, okay, well, I have to work this hard because of my own business. And she's like, no, you don't. She's like, what? She's like, what? Like, think about how hard you're working and all the steps all the things you're doing. Are you getting the results that justify that? I'm like, not really. I'm getting results, but not to work all these hours. She's like, so then just stop. She's like, try it another way. Try only working a couple hours a day and spending time with your son and taking walks and doing things, and leave room to receive. And I really heard that, and I took that on, and it was amazing when I stepped away from my computer, enjoyed my life, and just started like talking to people about my business more as just in conversation than trying to sell or pitch, that I started receiving.
So it's, this idea of kind of this theme of growth, you talked about, in this darkest moment where your brother was in a coma, and you just, had a young kid, and that's where you had this growth moment. And you mentioned another one here. You've worked with, Amazon and Google and LinkedIn and Pandora, which are very creative companies. And you've pitched this idea of using art, to help these companies, which are already, very creative. How did that, what kind of challenges did you have with getting into companies like this, and how were you able to, kind of persuade them that you're going to be able to add value?
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate to work with some of those big names. But honestly, like all the clients I work with, like it's interesting. I feel like the clients I've worked with all get it. And I realized that when I first started my business, and I'm like, okay, so what do you do when you start a business? You go to these networking events, when we could go to networking events. So I go to these networking events, and there are some people who like literally laughed in my face. Like, what are you doing? Bringing pottery to the workplace? Ha ha ha. And I just realized, I'm just gonna stop going. This is not good for my ego, and it's not getting me anywhere. And I just realized I'm just focusing on the low-hanging fruit, which means the people who get it. So like the companies you name, progressive, they're innovative, they are creative. So a lot of my customers and my clients are like tech companies. Like I live in Silicon Beach in Mar Vista, right near Playa Vista here. And there's a lot of companies here who just like, oh my gosh, that's what you do. That sounds amazing. And that's who I want to work with, right? I'm not trying to, I had a conversation, an inquiry call from an Ivy League university. And within 5 minutes, I'm like, they're not going for this, right? So, and I don't even try anymore, because I just feel like there's enough people out there who believe in creativity and who want to bring in a progressive, different way of training, that there's enough work there that I don't need to fight this battle of trying to get into companies who I have to teach the value of creativity to first. So those companies, like you're saying, Pandora, LinkedIn, they weren't hard, right? Because they're, like you said, they're creative companies already. They're innovative companies. They want to do things. They're disruptive. They want to do things differently. So they welcomed the work I do.
Can you talk a little bit about ego? You referenced it there. It feels a little bit like you, through your coaching, you arrived at a moment where you just set the ego aside. Just be who you are, and not like try to feed the ego or play to or pander maybe to a certain audience. If there's entrepreneurs listening who are struggling or going through it, and they're fighting their ego in how it aligns with their business, well, how do they arrive at a conclusion like you did?
That's so interesting. I try not to give too much advice, because I feel like for me, it really was just go through it. You have to just go through it and find it for yourself. One thing that I was told consistently when I started my business was like, never give discounts, never lower your price, never, 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 right? All this stuff. And what I realized was I didn't listen to them. And I did a lot of things for free. I did lower my price a ton for a lot of people. And what I realized in doing that is like, it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good in terms of lowering my value and then, selling something for a certain price or offering to do it for free and then feeling like, oh my gosh, I just expended all this energy and time. And even, I'm kind of a perfectionist and I like the aesthetics of things. So I'm not going to buy the cheap markers. I'm buying the expensive markers. So almost at a cost to me. And at a certain point, it was almost just in doing it enough times that I really, and I think for me, that's an interesting question particularly for me, because I love experiential, right? I feel like that's how people learn, is through experience. So for me as a young entrepreneur, I just had to learn through experience. I got advice to do a lot of things, and I didn't listen. I'm someone who had to learn for myself. So it's hard for me, I think, to answer that question, what advice I would give, because I would give the advice of like, go ahead, discount your price, see how you feel, and then you won't do it again.
I think you're saying experience is the best teacher, right? And
Absolutely.
Some of these entrepreneurs are gonna, have to create plans but in the moment they're gonna just have to make decisions and then see how it lands on them and adapt from there.
Right.
That's cool.
So obviously you've made an impact on these companies you've worked with, because you're still doing it and people are calling you back to bring you back. Is there one or two that you look back and say, wow, this one I really feel like we made a transformation or a huge impact that you can share with us?
So I can share two. So one is the Honor Foundation. We talked about that a little bit. The Honor Foundation is an organization that works with special force operators, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, to transition when they're leaving service, transition from military to civilian careers. So I met the program director for the San Diego campus, and he was looking to bring in something more creative for that program. So I looked at the 3-month program, and we decided transition night was where I would come in. It's the night before graduation, and we would do a workshop on possibilities, like getting them to think about what's possible for their lives, after the military. And of course, we do it. I bring in my Legos, my Play-Doh. We do some sketching. We do something called Force Connections, where I put images on the screen and you force connections, right? Like, so what characteristics of these images reflect something you might want to do in your future? And what's interesting about that is, the first thing a lot of people will come up with is something very practical. Oh, I'm going to go look for a CEO position at a security company or defense, whatever it might be. And by the end of the night, after going through iterations of this and by using their creativity, I've gotten people saying to me, oh my gosh, I used to love traveling and writing. Like, why don't I look at becoming a travel writer? Or when I was a kid, I used to act in school plays. I could pursue acting. So that, to me, like the Honor Foundation is something that's, and I talk about my TEDx talk too. It's just like, it's such a powerful place for me to be, because I am a refugee, and the Marines particularly has played such a vital role in my family's transition to the United States. And for me to now come in and facilitate transition night for them in that small way, I'm like, that's not coincidence. Right? That is not coincidence. This is like meant to be. So, and I keep in touch, like with Phil. Like, I didn't meet him directly through a workshop. I met him through the Honor Foundation. But for me to be able to keep in touch with some of these men and women afterwards and see where this takes them is pretty incredible. There's one guy in particular, about 2 cohorts ago. He had built a model of himself on a boat. And he actually put it on, he put it on his patio with the water in the background and took a picture of it and sent it to me. He's like, here's my possibility. He now runs a yacht company in San Diego. And he keeps that little Lego piece with him all the time.
As you're describing it that way, it reminds me of the Walt Disney saying, if you can dream it, you can do it mentality. And Gabe and I are big prescribers in that approach. It sounds like what you're doing is you're connecting creativity. So people who can't just visually see that future in their own mind, they can build it out. Is that what you're doing?
Yes. And so because when I talk about creativity, I know research now doesn't talk about like left brain and right brain, but I still talk about it that way because it's easy to visualize. So when you think about the way adults operate, especially in the workplace, we are constantly in left brain analytical thinking, right? We're always in left brain analytical thinking at work. But what we do in my work is now we draw in the right brain creativity. We teach you skills, tools, and it's not just the Legos, right? There's like a whole process called creative problem solving where we bring in different modalities so that you can see things through a different lens, through the lens of images, through like you said, building models, even sketching. Even though if you can't draw, everyone can sketch. So by drawing in those creative modalities, what you're doing is you're opening up a window or a door to ideas that aren't accessible by left brain thinking alone. So they may be in there, but you just can't find them if you're sitting in front of a computer screen, right? Or if you're sitting at a boardroom table just trying to talk out ideas. Because like I said, I'm not someone who talks to think. I need to think or use my hands to come up with ideas. So you're also, there's so much too. It's like this whole idea of diversity and inclusion, right? You're creating an inclusive environment where people who have cognitive diversity can bring their ideas to the table as well.
So is it kind of like a hands-on, visualization or manifestation that you're promoting, or is that?
Yeah. So I call it hands-on learning or hands-on thinking. And I find this so funny. I wish I could go back to my second grade Catholic school teacher and tell her, see, doodling is just fine. It's actually good for you. So yeah, the idea that you can like thinking with your hands, for example, with like some sketching work or the Lego work, oftentimes I'll tell people like as they build, like if you don't have an idea in mind, just keep doodling or just take some pieces of Lego and put them together and see what comes up for you.
I feel like as an organization, we're like a less sophisticated version of her. Like we aspire to do all the kinds of things you're saying, and some components we're doing fairly well. And but it aligns from you're saying things that are a part of our core values. It's kind of freaky to listen to her talk and recognize the alignment there. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, you want to come out and work with an insurance agency?
Yes, I mean, with that view, and I know you're in San Diego and you've got Phil on your team, I'm there.
All right.
We try to sell to our partners, like if you can make C3 and insurance look sexy, you should be able to attract customers from any industry.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I'm like, I have an insurance company.
All right, so this is a segment of the podcast where we turn to rapid fire questions. All right, so what's the first thing you notice when you just meet somebody?
Oh my goodness, that's an interesting one. Their smile.
When you're not feeling creative and need inspiration, you
play with my kid.
Where in your home is your work office?
So this is work office, playroom. We share space here.
If you could paint anything, what would you paint?
Another wall outside in my backyard.
Your favorite book is?
One Small Step Can Change Your Life, The Kaizen Way, by Dr. Robert Maurer.
What is the most delightful word you can think of?
Creativity.
I just got to reference it again. We have a team called Kaizen, so she just keeps dropping words and phrases that are integrated in our company. When you have a big win in life, you celebrate by?
Eating.
2021 for Vaughn is going to be the year of?
Hang on. I'm going to grab something to show you because I have a word for that. Hang on. I'll be right back. Untethered.
Ooh, I like that word.
What is-
You're working on that, aren't you?
So this is a workshop I did. I actually attended this workshop. We did our word of the year in watercolor. So that's where this came from. And I came up with that word untethered because I feel like, I kind of limit myself. I have a habit of like limiting myself and putting boundaries around myself. But this is like my untethered year. Doing more podcasts, getting out there, putting my voice out there, and really making a bigger impact.
Well, you have a magnetic personality. Everybody's going to be drawn in. So what is next for you and worksmART?
So what's next for me? So I am currently working on a digital course so we can get more of this, like the technical tools out to people, and also just growing my team. I really feel like what I would love to do now is have like a team of 5 facilitators who we can really go out there and just continue to make this impact. And what's next for worksmART in terms of, and Phil knows this, my 3-year plan is I'm going to do this from a farm. I'm getting a farm. I'm adopting more dogs. I might even have a couple donkeys. Well, I thought Petaluma until the pandemic increased the prices of a farm in Petaluma to like almost into the $2 million. So we may have to look somewhere else.
Or you just might need to increase your prices.
Or that's a great strategic idea.
That's literally my daughter's dream. She wants to run a dog farm. It's like 100% what she would say, almost word for. I don't know about the donkeys, but the dog farm side of it for sure is her vision.
Yeah, I mean, our house is not big enough for as many dogs as we want to adopt. So, so clearly the answer is not me stopping adopting dogs. It's getting a farm.
So reflecting back, you've had in such a short time, you've had an amazing journey. But knowing what you know now, what kind of advice would you give to your younger self?
This is the advice I constantly think about giving to my younger self. Like, just be confident and believe in yourself, right? I'll just believe in yourself and just take those. I mean, I talk about, take small steps to getting where you want, and don't let your doubts about yourself get in your way. There's a book, Deliberate Discomfort by Jason Van Camp. And in it, he says, doubt your doubts. So I think that in summary, I would say that doubt your doubts.
So we focus on being different at C3, and everyone we bring on our podcast has a unique ability within their own space that we see in them. And you've touched on different aspects of your approach and what you do at worksmART being different. But we've worked with, I don't know, 4 or 5 different leadership companies and coaches, and I can just feel it in listening to you speak. But in your own words, what is different about the approach with you and worksmART when a company engages you, say for leadership training?
So I think a couple things. One is this idea of co-creation. I don't come in with a prescribed. I mean, we have our leadership canvas program, we have our team development program, and it's interesting because I feel like I'm always recreating, and it's a lot of work for me, but I also enjoy it. But it's this idea of co-creating an experience with my clients. I never just like, here's what we're going to bring it in. We review it together. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? Let's make it work for. I mean, it's just like this idea of we are all individuals, and each company I work with is different than the last company I work with. So I always want our material, what we present, to be customized for the needs of your teams. So that's one thing. And the other thing too is this whole idea of I call it creative integration. So everything we do is through creative integration, which means we always bring in creativity, play, and experiential learning. Because what I have found is that's how we get to know each other best. That's how we get to know ourselves better. And it's how people learn and retain information best.
Thanks for coming on today. That brings us to the end here. Are there any parting words that you want to put out there, and/or how can people find you and worksmART Advantage that are interested to learn more?
Sure. So the best place to go to learn about my work is go.worksmartadvantage.com. Because like you said, like it's hard to imagine what this is. So that has videos to show you exactly what I do. And to find me, I'm on LinkedIn at Van Lai Damone. I'm always on LinkedIn. It's interesting, even this past year during the pandemic, I've met some amazing friends there. And when we talk, I'm like, wait, we've never even met in person. So I'm a connector, and I call myself like a collector of friends. So connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I will always respond, and always open to open for a phone call.
Thanks so much, Van.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was great meeting
awesome.
you too.